Hello, this is Joe Smith, and I am presenting my project, The Problems and Pitfalls in Budget Management. This is one of our final projects in our higher ed finance course. Yes, it was the Problems and Pitfalls project, but I also like to call it things that keep me awake at night. I say that because obviously I lead a division and I have budget responsibilities there, but also in terms of the institution, because of my job as in public relations as a spokesperson, when there are major budget pitfalls and problems for the institution, I find myself very often being the person who have to respond to those and explain what's going on and where we go from here. I want to start talking about what my present role is like as a budget manager. As you all know, I oversee the Office of University Relations, and while I do have an office manager who manages our budgets, I do sign every requisition, I approve every one, and ultimately, if there are budget problems, if there are shortfalls, if there are major catastrophes with the University Relations budget, my head's on the line first. So I want to look at the office as structure, and I'll explain how this relates to budget. Obviously, we include communications, marketing, media relations, creative design, video, photographic services, special events, and public radio. And if you look at that, it's quite a diverse area. But you got to keep in mind that ETSU is now in a decentralized budget model. And so while some people may say, well, you're lucky, you don't have to worry about enrollment in those things, it presents a unique challenge to those of us that are not in a type of model that, where we have revenue sources coming in, particularly through students. So as you can see here, there are a lot of different areas that we have, but I really have no revenue source coming through. So that does present a pretty significant challenge and concern for me, because what I have is what I have, and there's not a lot I can do to increase the budget that comes into us. So again, as I mentioned, this presents a lot of challenges. We're not an academic college, and there's not a revenue source. And even if there was a revenue source, I would be charging the campus, let's say, possibly for photography and videography. But in the long run, that doesn't do any good, in that it just takes money from the college. So again, that's a big concern that I have. Another one is with cost. I just this week approved a requisition to enhance some of our video equipment and our cameras. Obviously, digital assets are a big part of what we do in marketing and in social media. And so I want to have, quality equipment and software, but it's expensive. So clearly that while we may not have an opportunity for large budget increases, our costs are rising. Another one too is salaries. I have a lot of administrative staff in my office, and so when I have to replace them, it's hard to be competitive with the salary we offer. I recently found that out just when trying to hire a creative designer and also someone in marketing. ETSU does not offer competitive wages for what these professionals can make in the market. Now, granted, there are other benefits with our, particularly with 401k and tuition reimbursement, but still, it's been very challenging at times to bring in someone, a seasoned professional, simply because there are challenges with salaries. Also, as I mentioned, the public radio station WETS-FM reports to university relations. And so I don't know how familiar you are with public radio funding, but it's very challenging. There are a lot of threats to our funding. The big one is in federal funding. There has been ongoing threats to reduce / eliminate funding to public radio off and on for years. It just pretty much depends on who's in Congress and who's president. So we do get funding every year through a Corporation for Public Broadcasting grant, but that amount of the grant has drastically fluctuated through the years. So again, there's no guarantee from one year to the next. So public radio relies a lot on listener support. And yes, we want our listeners to support us and donate us. We're currently right now in a fund drive, so if you're wanting to make a contribution to public radio, this is a great time. But again, as you all know, there's not guarantees with that, and we have seen that fluctuate a lot through the years. our public radio station does receive state funding, but again, as you all know, that has uncertainties. We've never recovered from the 2008 budget crisis. So again, it's uncertainties there. And on top of that, while we have these different areas of funding that are not guaranteed, programming cost is skyrocketing. You would be surprised, these programs that you hear every morning, every afternoon, just how much it takes to support them. So again, as I talk about things that keep me awake at night, threats to funding of public radio is certainly a big one. I kind of want to jump over to what are the concerns of budget managers. And I think obviously there are a lot of pitfalls. As you can imagine, if you had an Atari, the graphics look a little familiar. I think one of the biggest concerns for all budget managers is simply the great unknown. There are so many unknowns out there. And granted, anyone who owns a business, any CFO, any fiscal manager for any company will say the same thing, but I definitely think that higher ed, because of the different funding structures, so many things can change, and so there is a great unknown. I kind of joke with our CFO. I think that every day brings its own headache if you are a budget manager for an institution. So I'm going to start with state funding, as I just mentioned. It's interesting to note that since 2008, we have not recovered. There may be some isolated cases where funding has increased, but we have not recovered from the downfall in 2008. I think it's really scary because I remember thinking at that time it's going to take a while to bounce back and improve. And here we are a decade later, and it's not quite happened yet. We're still significantly below where we were. So I think when we look at the way costs have gone up and all the other challenges, what's not recovered was just simply the amount we got from the state. Which leads to Tuesday's headache, rising tuition. Obviously, it's a very unpleasant topic, yet it's something that is part of our vocabulary every year. Appropriations have not gone up, costs have, and so has tuition. And what really concerns me about that is at some point, could ETSU, could Northeast State, could any institution, could it outprice itself in the market? Could it be more to attend there than the actual value is? It's a big concern because we're not seeing other revenue sources increase. So as long as tuition's going up, that is a really it's a major problem that I have, and I worry that we're going to ask ourselves one of these days, hey, have we outpriced ourselves? Hopefully not. If you look at the states in terms of percentage change in tuition, Tennessee is up there, 54.3%. The funding per student is much less than it was, about $1,200 less than it was 10 years ago. We're seeing revenues are decreasing, but expenses are definitely going up. So there's clearly not enough the revenue coming in to match the expenses. So clearly that's a big challenge, and you look at tuition as one way to counter that, but clearly there are implications with when you use tuition dollars to do that when they start just rising to record high levels. And Wednesday's headache is one that we all know, salaries are low. And that presents a challenge to the budget managers because they know there's a desire to increase wages, and I think there's support to do that, but you've got to find the resources to do that. And I think it's really interesting here in Tennessee, we have seen for many, many years that for a governor to recommend a certain percentage raise for all state employees, rarely is all that money provided. The state may give some of that, sometimes none. They will recommend a salary increase, so it's up to the budget manager to find out how they're going to find that match. And sometimes it comes through tuition. So clearly, improving salaries is a priority, but when you're looking at no tuition increases or low tuition increases, no other major revenue sources, it really becomes a challenge. How do you meet that? So clearly, if you work in higher ed, while there are a lot of benefits that come with it, salaries are not in most places where they could be compared to market value. And then, of course, the big one there that has everyone worrying is declining enrollment. I mean, this is a major concern. When enrollments go down, that has a huge impact on your revenue source just through tuition dollars, but also it even catapults further for those schools that are operating within a performance funding model. So if enrollment's down, you're not meeting a lot of benchmarks, whether it be retention or graduation. So it's kind of a spiral of dominoes falling forward when we see enrollment going down. We're seeing, if you look at the number of students graduating high school, that it changes through the years. But also enrollment has, it's become a very competitive industry. I mean, think about it. There was a time we didn't see billboards out there advertising enrollment. It kind of came on, and now obviously everywhere you go, you'll see universities with billboards. But I think the whole issue of just recruiting students is becoming competitive. That has a lot of costs involved, particularly with marketing. You would be surprised if you knew how much it costs to have a billboard for a month or even a year. It's multiple thousands of dollars. So competitive marketing again comes with a heavy price tag. And kind of related to the billboards, I call it sticker shock, which is a great way to bring stress upon your budget manager and definitely cause the headache for Friday. A lot of programming services have high price tags. And yes, you can definitely say across the board that tuition is being able to support rising costs. Every program is seeing costs go up. But there are some services that are outrageously expensive and they cost a lot to operate. And sometimes they're not optional. Clearly, information technology is one of them. You have to have IT. It has a huge, huge relevance to instruction, particularly with online learning, but even with hybrid courses or on-ground courses, technology, classroom instruction. It's a huge part of that. Technology supports campus communication, email, WebEx. I mean, you've got to have a solid infrastructure to support communication. And the big one that we're hearing a lot more about is cybersecurity. It seems every few months we're learning about new ways that hackers and others with malicious intentions have found ways to get around the system and to break in. So clearly, there are ways you can protect yourself, but they are not they're not cheap at all. And this is the graphic that I pulled from Inside Higher Ed that kind of looks at some of the challenges with state funding, particularly with how it affects IT and budget cuts. And if you look, there are cuts, and even some years there's some mid-year cuts. So think about the challenges your chief IT officer has in terms of supporting the institution, its various missions with IT, but then how you do that when yet your budgets are being slashed. So that's just one area. I mean, there are a lot of many others that are expensive to operate, and I think as we look at challenging budget times, you really wonder how they're able to pull it off. So with all this said, you're wondering, why would anyone want to be a budget manager? And furthermore, if you are, help, how do you deal with these challenges that are coming out there? And yes, they're real. But obviously, there are some opportunities, and one we've discussed throughout the semester was the push for foundation dollars. Yes, I know it's a shallow pool and some of the same people are getting hit up, but I think that foundation support is definitely an opportunity, not only just foundation dollars, but other revenue sources through entrepreneurial endeavors. But going back with the foundation, one thing that I think is important, if the school wants to build its donor support, they can't just, look at their foundation and development officers and say, okay, you go fix our problem. No, I think that it's important that when you're building a relationship with donors, it's an investment over time. So when students first arrive on the campus, if they have a positive experience on campus, they're going to leave and most likely be a donor down the road. Creating that positive experience on campus requires a commitment from everyone. Now, yes, you do have to have development officers, boots on the ground, out raising funds, building alumni relations, and we have seen at ETSU a significant investment in the number of development officers. But I think that is an important opportunity to support your budget is through the foundation. And I think you have to be careful though, because there are a lot of restrictions that foundations have on how certain dollars can be used. So you have to, again, be careful that if you're seeking funding for something, it's something appropriate within the foundation. This is why you see a lot of foundations seeking unrestricted funds that would support major priorities. I think another thing that I would encourage to do is, moving to a decentralized budget model. ETSU's done that. It aligns resources with services and where you have good outcomes. It pushes colleges to focus on its mission and opportunities to be successful, and it puts the responsibility of the budget on the deans. I do think granted, it's difficult for some, and that you suddenly look and you may be down a year, your enrollment may be down, and that has implications, and vice versa if you're up. But I feel like that as we look to this time of challenged budgets and issues with unsure funding, putting this fiscal responsibility on the deans and tying it to outcomes is really, really important. Again, that's all I really have. I enjoyed this project. I think as we definitely this semester, we've looked at a lot of different challenges and the ways that budgets are developed and the different pressures on them, and most importantly, the uncertainties that we live in. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. And I hope everyone has a good remaining semester. Thanks a lot.